Your Highness, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be attending the Global Aerospace Summit here in Abu Dhabi, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi and Deputy Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces of the United Arab Emirates, for his patronage and support of this important event. I'm also very pleased that the International Air Transport Association, IATA, whose members are the customers of many of the companies represented here today, has been given a prominent role at this aerospace conference. It speaks well of your willingness to listen to your customers and to what we have to say, and I hope I will not disappoint you. Over the past 25 years, the Gulf region has experienced an economic transformation in which Abu Dhabi has played a leading part. And aviation has been at the centre of this evolution, as is reflected not only in the success of the well-known and rising Gulf airlines whose vivid liveries brighten airports in all corners of the globe, but also in the emergence of a dynamic aerospace sector. And this is typified by our hosts, Mubadala Aerospace, which in just a few short years has staked its claim to having a major presence in global aviation. And Abu Dhabi therefore provides an ideal setting to take a forward look at aviation and at the challenges we face in reaching a sustainable future. And let's begin our discussion by looking at the state of the air transport industry around the world. Now, last month, IATA downgraded our airline profit forecast for this year from $3.5 billion to $3 billion. And we expect to generate revenues of $633 billion this year. So if you do the maths, that means we'll achieve a paltry 0.5% profit margin, which will come on revenue growth of 5.8% and traffic growth of 3.6%. And the biggest obstacle to a better financial performance is the price of fuel. And the consensus forecast sees Brent crude averaging $115 a barrel this year, up from $111 last year. And that $4 swing will add some $36 billion to airline operating costs. As we all know, of course, Brent is already trading above $120. Now, the bottom line impact of this fuel price increase is being moderated by some positive factors. Europe seems to have averted a financial meltdown, at least for now. And in addition to that, it seems that freight markets have stabilized, albeit at low levels. And our most recent traffic numbers show that capacity is growing at a slower rate than demand, leading to rising load factors and some mild yield improvement, although at the risk of discouraging some price-sensitive discretionary traffic. Now, turning to the Middle East region, IATA sees a profit this year of $500 million, which is up from our previous estimate of $300 million and represents a significant improvement compared to earnings of just $100 million last year. And the Middle East is one of just two regions that have seen their outlook boosted since our December forecast, and that's certainly a positive. And the region as a whole appears to have recovered from the negative effects on air travel of the 2011 Arab Spring. But these are not strong results when measured against the size of the region's aviation sector. And the entire industry remains extremely vulnerable to any new shocks that could easily push it back into losses. And even if the industry achieves our forecast profit of $3 billion, it'll mean that collectively airlines have delivered aggregate losses of $26 billion on $5.5 trillion of revenues since the year 2001. Now, this all sounds rather glum, so let me step back from the glum report for a moment to observe that airlines purchase the products and services offered by many of you in this room. And our ability to do so and to continue to do so is highly dependent on our ability to generate a satisfactory return on those investments, which, of course, in turn is primarily driven by the value we're able to generate from the products and services we purchase and lease. And that's why working together as a team is so important. But aviation's contribution to the global economy can't just be measured only on the profit and loss ledger. In March, the Air Transport Action Group released a study conducted by Oxford Economics which showed that aviation supports 57 million jobs around the globe, including 8.4 million direct jobs and $2.2 trillion of economic activity, which represents 3.5% of global GDP. So if aviation were a country, it would rank 19th in the world in terms of GDP. And aviation's importance as a catalyst for economic growth is well understood in the Middle East, and particularly here in the Gulf region, where airports rise from the desert ahead of the demand curve, not behind it. Governments here work in partnership with industry through forward-looking policies that value aviation as a generator of wealth and jobs, and not just as sheep to be sheared by the tax collector, as happens too often in other places. The Oxford study shows that the Middle East represents 3% of global passengers, has 5% of the total jobs, and 6% of the GDP generated by air transport. In terms of actual numbers, Oxford's study reveals that within the region, air transport supports 2.7 million jobs and $129 billion in GDP. And furthermore, aviation's role in the region is set to grow rapidly over the next 2 decades, as international passenger numbers rise from 77 million in 2010 to 220 million in 2030. Now, few states have a better understanding of the economic vitality that aviation's connectivity provides than here in the United Arab Emirates. One example is the fact that Dubai Airport was the world's 13th busiest airport by passengers last year, with nearly 51 million passengers, although the population of Dubai is just below 2 million. An indication of the high level of cooperation that exists among participations in the aviation value chain may be found in Abu Dhabi, where Etihad Airways and Abu Dhabi International Airport, working together, have implemented all 6 self-service options in IATA's fast travel initiative. And they were among the first 6 airport airline pairs to achieve this very important milestone for customer service. Another example is Emirates, which topped the charts of airlines implementing e-freight. And nearly 37% of their eligible freight shipments are taking advantage of the more efficient e-freight process. So when I'm asked, what do you think the future of aviation will look like? I'm tempted to respond that I hope it bears more than a passing resemblance to what is occurring today in the UAE, as well as in places like Qatar, China, Singapore, and South Korea, where governments are using aviation strategically to spearhead economic development. But this bright future isn't guaranteed. It depends on having the right conditions in place to support competitive, sustainable aviation businesses. And many of these are beyond the direct control of airlines, and most require that industry and government work together with a common vision and a common purpose. And specifically, we need a shared agenda on the issues of safety, security, the environment, and of course, infrastructure. Safety is the #1 priority. We must be safe to be sustainable. And the good news is that 2011 was the safest year in the history of aviation. 2.8 billion people flew safely on 38 million flights. And if we look specifically at Western-built jets, which is the most common measure of safety, we had 11 hull losses. And that's 1 hull loss for every 2.7 million flights, which is a 39% improvement on 2010. This is a remarkable achievement, and it's a tribute to the entire stakeholder community: airlines, equipment manufacturers who give us such magnificent machines to operate, as well as airports, air navigation service providers, and safety regulators. Each of these works together every day to make the skies safer. And indeed, our cooperation on safety provides an ideal template on how we should be aligned on the other key issues that I've identified. Now, unfortunately, we did less well in the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, where the 2011 rate was 2.02 Western-built jet hull losses per million flights, or around 1 hull loss for every 500,000 flights. This is 5.5 times the world average. And it also represented a sharp deterioration compared with the previous year, when the MENA region achieved a rate of 0.72 hull losses per million flights. But if aviation is to continue to deliver on its immense promise, safety must be addressed as a community, working in partnership with governments and based on global standards, such as the IATA Operational Safety Audit, IOSA, which is a requirement for membership in IATA. The global accident rate for non-IOSA airlines is more than twice as high as the IOSA rate. And similarly, the IATA Safety Audit for ground operations is improving safety and helping to reduce the $4 billion annual cost of ground damage. Along with global standards, we need data and analysis to identify emerging safety trends and guide what action to take to mitigate risks. And sharing information is crucial if we're going to achieve it. Of course, we rely heavily on our supplier base to monitor aircraft and systems performance and identify any issues which are potentially affecting reliability and safety. And looking specifically at the MENA region, I'm very pleased that a regional aviation safety group has been established, and IATA continues to work with all the stakeholders to address this very important issue. But a bright future for aviation also depends on airport security that is effective, efficient, user-friendly, and non-obtrusive. Today, we have a security regime that's certainly very effective, but it falls well short on all the other criteria. You know, we've got long queues, we have packing and unpacking of carry-on baggage, removing items of clothing, and occasionally intrusive searches. This is neither efficient nor non-obtrusive, and you certainly couldn't call it customer-friendly. Now, during my time at IATA, one of my priorities is to evolve this into a better system with a checkpoint of the future. Now, this rests on two pillars. The first is to differentiate screening using passenger information that we're already collecting for immigration purposes. Then we combine this with technology that allows passengers to walk through checkpoints without stopping, disrobing, or unpacking. Now, we already have support from major stakeholders, such as the European Commission, the Chinese government, the United States Department of Homeland Security, and Interpol. And on top of that, 16 countries have endorsed a statement of principles for such a checkpoint. As yet, we don't have any signatories for this region, but I have high hopes that this will change. And moving a global system along is going to take a little bit of time. Governments here and elsewhere must be willing to take these concepts from the drawing board into the airport terminal. But I believe we're off to a running start to improve both the experience and effectiveness of airport security. Any forward look at aviation must incorporate a vision of adequate airport and air traffic management infrastructure. Without it, airports' contribution as an economic catalyst will be compromised. The MENA region has invested more than $100 billion on airport projects, including $6.8 billion here in Abu Dhabi, $14 billion on the new Doha International Airport in Qatar, and $33 billion of the new Al Maktoum International in Dubai. Now compare and contrast this with the situation in the United Kingdom, for example, where the government has rejected a third runway for Heathrow, or in Germany, where a federal court this month blocked night flights into Frankfurt Airport, a move that has serious implications for Frankfurt's role as a cargo hub in the future. By value, 35% of the world's trade in goods moves by air, although it represents less than 1% in volume. And anything that makes it harder for airlines and airports to participate in this trade is going to have an impact far beyond the direct cargo supply chain. The effects will resonate across the economy of the entire country. A manufacturer that's eager to invest in a new global logistics center won't look to put it in an environment that makes it difficult to get parts and finished products to customers and markets. It's going to set up in a jurisdiction that welcomes its business with easy access. But runways and terminals, of course, are only half the story. What's also required is efficient air traffic management. And moving towards better efficiency is very uneven, and nowhere is it satisfactory. With the passage of the FAA reauthorization legislation this past winter, it appears that the US Federal Aviation Administration can move forward on its much-needed NextGen air traffic management system. Although questions remain about the cost-benefit equation for airlines who are going to have to make major investments in new cockpit technology. In Europe, we are seeing progress towards the single European sky, but at a glacial pace that is completely out of step with what is urgently needed from both economic and environmental standpoints. The single European sky would save 16 million tons of CO2 annually. But governments are just not investing the political capital to get the job done. Only 5 of 27 states are on track to meet a very unambitious goal of reducing average flight delays by 30 seconds by the year 2014. Now in Asia, where political realities make a single Asian sky unrealistic, I'm pleased to see there is progress towards a seamless Asian sky, although we're still in the very early stages of this much-needed transformation. Within the MENA region, air traffic management infrastructure is not harmonized or facilitated to its full extent, and routings in some areas are less efficient than they could be. With movements growing 11% annually in the Bahrain, Emirates, and Muscat flight information regions, we could see a doubling of traffic in 7 years. And this creates the potential for aerial bottlenecks. The growth in east-west traffic to and from North Africa brings another dimension to the challenge. If you add to this that only around half the airspace is permanently open to civil aviation, with the rest controlled by the military, and you have a recipe for future gridlock. But on the positive side, the UAE is ahead of many other ANSPs with regard to ATM capabilities, and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain are in the process of making much-needed upgrades to their air traffic management. IATA is working closely with governments, air navigation service providers, the Civil Air Navigation Services Organization, CANSO, to ensure alignment of air navigation and airport investment plans with the needs of airspace users. And I also see an excellent opportunity for the aerospace community to put its collective muscle behind efforts to modernize airspace technology and procedures in practical and cost-efficient ways. Technology for technology's sake and gold-plated solutions won't help us to reduce emissions, save fuel, or increase airspace capacity. A better alternative is to work in close cooperation with airlines to develop operational procedures using existing and deployed technology that offer a sustainable business case for all participants in the value chain. Aviation's license to grow and to fulfill the global demand for connectivity also depends upon its environmental responsibility and sustainability. And that means aviation must address its 2% contribution to human-caused global CO2 emissions. Airlines, airports, ANSPs, manufacturers have come together and have made 3 sequential commitments. First of all, to improve aircraft fuel efficiency by 1.5% every year to 2020. Secondly, to cap CO2 emissions from 2020 with carbon neutral growth. And thirdly, to cut net carbon emissions from air transport in half by 2050 compared to 2005. And at a recent meeting of the Aviation and Environment Summit in Geneva, the industry collectively recommitted to these aggressive targets in a declaration signed by 16 global aviation companies and organizations. And we called upon governments worldwide to do their part to help aviation achieve them. Our strategy is built on 4 pillars that include investment in new technologies such as biofuels, savings from operational improvements, and more efficient airport and air traffic management infrastructure. We need engine and airframe manufacturers to continue to pursue efficiency improvements and not to be lulled into complacency by their wonderful full order backlogs. Beyond this, sustainable biofuels have the potential to cut aviation's carbon footprint by up to 80%. Now, aviation's done the heavy lifting to prove that biofuels work safely and efficiently in commercial aircraft, and to certify drop-in biofuels as replacements for conventional jet fuel. These biofuels don't compete with food crops for land or water, and we're seeing important progress around the world with more than a dozen projects underway involving airlines, aerospace suppliers, fuel companies, and other stakeholders. In this region, Qatar Airways, together with Airbus, Rolls-Royce, and others, have formed the Qatar Advanced Biofuel Platform Consortium to develop what is the first large-scale algae biojet fuel chain, value chain in the world. But aviation can't do it alone. The sustainable biofuels industry requires government policy initiatives that will attract investment and de-risk the scaling up of production. Now, the fourth pillar is the introduction of market-based measures, such as emissions trading. The aviation industry recognizes that such economic measures are a necessity if they're temporary, and they'll provide a required bridge to enable it to meet its environmental targets in the longer term. But it's absolutely critical that such measures are agreed upon in a global approach under the leadership of ICAO. Unfortunately, as we all know, Europe has chosen a go-it-alone regional approach with the inclusion of international aviation in the EU emissions trading scheme from this year. This is driving discord at a time when we need harmony. Why? Because non-European states see the intention to tax non-EU airlines in emissions over non-EU territory as an attack on their sovereignty. Now, representatives of 24 nations met in Moscow in February to discuss countermeasures. They issued a declaration urging a global solution through ICAO, and they outlined possible actions if Europe continues on its unilateral and extraterritorial path. Both India and China have already prohibited their carriers from participating in the EU program. Now, nobody wants a trade war, but the prospects are growing more likely, and we're already hearing reports of retaliatory measures. There is a solution, and that is ICAO, where global standards and solutions for air transport are made. Now, the EU deserves full credit for bringing the emissions issue to the front and centre of the global aviation agenda. And I believe that recent indications emerging from Europe do point towards their understanding that a global agreement through ICAO is the way forward. But now it's time for Europe sincerely to take a stake in making the decisions and the discussions at ICAO a success. And I choose those words very carefully, because if I understand the international mood correctly, non-European states are looking for some proof of Europe's sincerity. And that is going to mean more than simply reiterating its determination to proceed with implementing its scheme, even as it professes to support a negotiated agreement through the ICAO process. Ladies and gentlemen, aviation will be the primary means of moving people safely over long distances for the foreseeable future. Nothing can change that fact. And in that sense, we don't face an existential threat to our business. But there are no guarantees that aviation will be able to drive economic growth, to create jobs, to connect the world in a physical World Wide Web into the future. That is highly dependent on many factors beyond our direct control. To the extent that governments recognize aviation's true worth as an enabling industry, the world faces a richer and more connected future. And to help convey that message, IATA's commissioned studies conducted by Oxford Economics that explain and quantify the benefits of aviation in 58 different countries. Now, I'm passionate about aviation. I believe it is a force for good in the world. It connects people and goods to markets, reunites families, it enables journeys of discovery. It's the responsibility of all of us and all of aviation stakeholders to ensure that that message is heard so that the benefits of this wonderful industry may continue to be enjoyed by all. Thank you very much.